Today, the Reserve Bank to make a call on interest rates amid rising inflation and growing global uncertainty.
If there is another interest rate increase, it will hit households hard.
At least 400 people have been killed in a Pakistani airstrike on a hospital in Kabul. US President critical of Western allies for refusing to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. And a New South Wales woman discovers that she and her twin sister are not genetically related to their parents in a 30-year-old. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. The Reserve Bank is widely expected to raise interest rates for a second straight month this afternoon. The RBA increased the cash rate in February for the first time in more than 2 years after inflation picked up noticeably in December. Uncertainty surrounding the Middle East conflict and the global jump in oil prices are expected to play a big part in the RBA's decision, with inflation now expected to rise beyond 4.5%, according to Treasury modelling. Ahead of the May federal budget, Finance Minister Katie Gallagher says the government will be factoring in cost of living pressures, with a possible third rate rise forecast for May.
If there is another interest rate increase, it will hit households hard, and that's why the government's focus will always be on how do we help with cost of living and how do we finalise and put those finishing touches on the budget that will be handed down in May.
Economists say the RBA is concerned the rising price of oil is fueling inflation.
I think on balance they are going to go today. And probably, unfortunately, for some, go again in May. So I think the RBA is really doubling down here to slow the economy. The desire here is to slow demand, slow the economy, and put downward pressure on prices, which are still a bit elevated.
Alicia Barry is with me in the studio. Hi, Alicia. So the expectation is that the RBA will raise rates later today. Is it a certainty?
Well, it's not a certainty, but the majority of economists do think that the RBA's hand is going to be forced here, and whether it wants to or not, it's probably going to have to lift interest rates. And that's because even before we had this Middle East conflict, the economy was picking up, it was heating up, and that's why we saw that rate increase in February, only months after it had previously cut in August. And it's looking like it might have to do another increase because of the state of the economy and the fact that on every measure, inflation is outside of the RBA's target band. That is monthly, quarterly, underlying, headline. It's all outside of that target band, and the RBA is not expecting to bring inflation back toward that midpoint until mid-2028. So inflation has already been out of the band for about 4 years. Its credibility is at risk here if it doesn't deliver what it is meant to do, and that is bring inflation back. Now, that is putting aside the pain of households and the potential impact to the economy. Of course, the unemployment rate is very low as well, and the Reserve Bank has been at pains to preserve the gains in the employment market that have been made post-COVID and keep them there. But it does look as though it is wanting to really bring inflation back down. It doesn't want it to run away in expectations of higher inflation get entrenched. And that looks like the main reason that it could bring interest rates higher at this meeting. Of course, there are the concerns about what that would do to the consumer sector, which is already under pressure.
So what would a rate rise mean for home borrowers?
Yeah, so the banks more than likely, in fact, it's almost certain, the big banks would pass on that 25 basis point increase to households with a mortgage. And around a third of Australian households have a mortgage, the other third rent, the other third, and we're breaking it down in very average terms, own their own house outright. So we've got a graphic here that shows you if you had a $500,000 mortgage over a 25-year horizon, it would be an extra $76 a month. That goes up to $106 for a $700,000 mortgage, and a $1 million mortgage, not outsized in the big cities like Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, $151 extra. And that comes at a time, Ros, when petrol prices are obviously rising and inflation inflation, as I've just mentioned, is also elevated, so sort of a triple whammy for households.
And how are the markets doing at this stage of the day?
We're still hanging on to gains ahead of the RBA's decision at 2:30 Eastern Daylight Time, as you said, and there's a 78% chance priced in by financial markets now that the Reserve Bank will pull the trigger on a rate rise. And I did lie, the All Ords has actually given back those gains while we've been talking, but only slightly. It's sitting pretty flat at the moment. The ASX 200 index itself is hanging on to just a few points. If we turn and look at the top movers, the gold mining sector has been out in front, with Toro Gold benefiting from a broker price target upgrade. It's the coal mining sector that is leading the losses. New Hope has posted a lower first half profit on weaker coal prices. Across the region, it's looking to be a bit of a mixed session. The NZ50 on the way down, the Nikkei in Japan managing some gains, and those markets across China as they start for the day are also pointing in opposite directions. Now to the US, where stocks ended higher, really fueled by gains in AI-related stocks after Meta Platforms climbed about 2% following a report it's preparing to cut its workforce by around 20%, while oil prices did come down in the US session, and that helped trade there. The Dow Jones up 0.8%, the S&P 1% higher, and the Nasdaq about 1.1% stronger. Let's look at the oil price now, of course, very much in focus, and it is climbing in the Asian session back well above that $100 a barrel mark as a result of the fear and concern about the Middle East. That price continues to push up. Gold prices, though, coming down, and the Australian dollar will, of course, be very much in focus when the RBA delivers its decision. It's given back overnight gains against the greenback so far, sitting at 70.6 US cents, Ros.
Thanks, Alicia. Staying with rates, let's go to political reporter Isabel Rowe, who's in Parliament House. Good afternoon, Isabel. So how critical is this rates decision for the government?
Well, the government is pretty worried about whether rates do rise or not, as it is a reflection of the economic management and where the country is standing at the moment. If the RBA does raise rates, it would be the second time in a row. And the government will be seeking to point out the external factors here, that being the Middle East war and the impact that that's having on oil prices and uncertainty. That is where they will want people's minds to go as a reason as to why we're in the situation that we're in, why the RBA potentially has to make that decision. The Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, said in her interviews this morning that this is going to be a challenging budget coming up. Not only will they need to manage the impact of rate rises on people's hip pockets, they need to manage the impact of the war and the oil prices. They also want to push ahead with some tax reform, and they need to find some savings for people. So the government has got some tricky things to balance here. All the while, the opposition are saying that this isn't just about the Middle East war. They're pointing to the fact that inflation wasn't where it was meant to be beforehand. They say this is a homegrown problem and that a lot of it has got to do with the amount of government spending. So the government will be hoping that rates stay where they are for now, but as they say, there's nothing that they can do about it. They just need to react when that decision comes out at 2:30.
Meanwhile, Isabel, fuel companies have been in an emergency meeting with the ACCC over fuel prices.
Yeah, they have. So that meeting has happened this morning. Basically, what the Treasurer has said is that the ACCC has hauled in his words, major fuel companies, service station companies, automobile companies to explain why there was such a steep price rise at the Bowser directly after the start of the Middle East war just a couple of weeks ago. Jim Chalmers says that today is an opportunity for the regulator to speak to those companies, get them to explain why the price rises were so steep, and if there has been any misconduct, to be able to warn them that that's something that they shouldn't be doing. Jim Chalmers has said that the government has got this under control, but there has been criticism from the opposition about how fast they have managed this situation. Early on, there was nothing to worry about. It was all in hand, and a couple of days later, the opposition says the government was talking about fuel supply shortages. Here is the opposition leader, Angus Taylor.
Price gouging is unacceptable. It's not hard to work out what the price should be based on the international prices. Very clear The ACCC needs to be all over this and taking to task any company that's doing the wrong thing.
Angus Taylor there, and we should find out a little bit more about what happened in that ACCC meeting a bit later today.
So the government's releasing fuel from its stockpile into the system today, Isabel. When will we feel the impact of that?
It could take some days, potentially weeks, the Energy Minister says, for the full effect of that to be felt in the areas where this fuel is being sent, and that is regional Australia. The government has said that fuel companies need to send their stocks there as a priority to deal with some of the localised fuel supply issues that are happening. Now, the government last week announced what it was going to do about this problem. It said it would release 20% of the emergency stockpile. That's about 5 or 6 days of fuel, and that is to alleviate some smaller localised supply issues. The government is very keen to say that we don't have a difference in the amount of fuel coming into the country. We still have fuel coming into the country. We just have a behavioural problem, they say. People are panic buying, and when he was asked about it this morning, the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, is urging people to just behave as normal.
You know, right now our message to Australians is to just keep going on as you normally would. As we speak, the same amount of ships that are coming in supplying Australia are doing that. Obviously, you know, this is a function of how long this conflict continues, and that's not something that I can answer in terms of what's going to happen.
As well as the amount of fuel being released from the stockpile, there's also a change to fuel quality standards. So fuel with more sulphur is being able to be sold locally. That's something else the government says will help alleviate some of those localised supply and demand issues.
Thanks, Isabel. And we'll have special coverage of the interest rate decision here on the ABC News channel. We'll bring you that decision live at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, along with full analysis from our business team. And then at 3:30, we'll be hearing from the Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock outlining her reasons for the decision. You can also watch that live on the ABC News channel. So stay with us through the afternoon. Afghan authorities say at least 400 people have been killed in a Pakistani airstrike on a hospital. The facility in the capital, Kabul, was treating around 3,000 people. The government spokesman says another 250 people are injured. Pakistan has dismissed the accusation, saying its strikes didn't hit any civilian sites. It follows earlier reports from Kabul that it was exchanging fire with its neighbour. It's one of the deadliest attacks after weeks of fighting between the two countries, with Pakistan accusing Afghanistan of harbouring militants, a claim the Taliban denies. The US President has repeated his call for international leaders to help the US secure the Strait of Hormuz. The vital shipping route linking the Persian Gulf with the Arabian Sea has been effectively shut since the US-led war on Iran began. European and NATO leaders have been resisting President Trump's demands to send warships to the region.
We don't need them, but it's interesting. I'm almost doing it in some cases, not because we need them, but because I want to find out how they react. Because I've been saying for years that if we ever did need them, they won't be there. Not all of them.
A fifth of the world's oil and LNG usually flows through the strait every day. The route is especially crucial for Asia and increasingly for Europe, which has struggled to stabilise its energy supply since cutting ties with Russia.
Like the United States and Israel, we want to see an end to Iran's nuclear and missile programs, but we will not participate in this war. We made that clear from day one, and that remains the position of the federal government.
Nobody wants to go actively in this war, and of course everybody is concerned what will be the outcome.
While taking the necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies, we will not be drawn into the wider war.
Only a handful of ships have recently passed through, including this Indian-flagged tanker, after negotiating safe passage. Iran's foreign minister says the strait is only closed to its enemies.
The Americans are asking other countries to come and help them so the Strait of Hormuz remains open, which of course from our perspective it is open. It is only closed to our enemies, to those who carried out unjust aggression against our country and to their allies.
There's a consensus among Western and Gulf states that the Strait of Hormuz can only be safely reopened once the war comes to an end. US President Trump claims Tehran is ready to negotiate, although that's been denied by Iran's foreign ministry. But the United Nations says it's working discreetly on a diplomatic solution.
The Secretary General remains very much engaged and in frequent contact with senior officials in the region and beyond. But we're not going to be feeding the speculation. The Secretary General will continue to work discreetly on this because, frankly, the stakes are too high.
Israel's military says its troops have begun what it calls limited and targeted ground operations against the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Our Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran reports from Beirut.
This is something which has been building for a number of weeks now. Israeli troops and tanks massing along the country's northern border ahead of a potential ground invasion. And now the confirmation from the Israeli military that that has begun. The IDF is describing this as targeted and limited ground operations, going after claimed Hezbollah targets. But in conjunction with widespread airstrikes right across the south of Lebanon, this has a huge impact on the local population there. The Lebanese Red Cross is saying more than 900,000 people have been displaced across southern Lebanon and in the capital Beirut further north since Israel began its bombardment of the country around a fortnight ago. That was, of course, fueled by Hezbollah opening fire on Israel in solidarity with Iran there. So this is a very significant moment, seeing these forces move in, and it is what many people fear will be the precursor to a longer-term invasion, a longer-term occupation, certainly something that the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has suggested could be on the cards. He says Israeli forces will stay operating inside southern Lebanon, inside that area south of the Litani River, until Israel is convinced that the north of its country is safe. A very broad description, a very vague description of the scale of this operation there. In addition to the large number of people who've been displaced across the south and also in Beirut, primarily from Dahia, the Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut south, there are now more than 880 people across the country who have been killed since this campaign began by Israel. More than 100 of them are children. And this is really a crisis that Lebanon does not have the ability to deal with. Not only is this a large number of people, this is a country which is in dire straits financially. It doesn't have that safety net to be able to support that population, and that is why there are real fears about what will happen from here, how long this campaign will last, and whether or not it will be on a completely different track to, say, any US and Israeli action against Iran if the US President Donald Trump decides to call time there. What we know about the Iranian conflict, which is the focus of this broader regional war that we're seeing over the course of the last 2 or so weeks, is that Israel says it still has thousands of targets it wants to hit inside Iran. And we've seen the US and Israel continue to attack sites, military sites in particular, across Iran over the course of the day, prompting huge explosions to be recorded in some parts of the country. Iran, in response, is continuing its retaliatory strikes, not only against Israel, and we have seen more missile barrages overnight Australia time. That has left a significant amount of damage in some parts of the country. Bits of missiles have fallen on houses, for example, in occupied East Jerusalem. Some debris has also fallen in Jerusalem's Old City near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site that Christians believe is where Jesus was crucified and buried, something that the Israeli government is saying is a real turning point in this conflict, that the holy sites of the old city are now coming under threat. But also we know that Iran has been targeting the Gulf states continually, and a drone hit Dubai's international airport earlier on Monday local time, shutting down operations there, causing a cascade effect for flight paths across the region as well. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that the Gulf states need to clarify their stance, whether or not they are cheering on this aggression from the US and Israel. Read into that they will continue to be targets unless they start speaking out against the US and Israel. Abbas Araghchi saying hundreds of civilians in his country have been killed, including more than 200 children. Now, there are mixed messages coming from leaders right across this region as to how long this will last. Certainly Israel wanting to continue this, Iran saying it will continue responding for as long as it's attacked. So as we head into the third week of this conflict, again, no sign of restraint coming anytime soon.
Matthew Doran there. A watch and act alert has been issued for the Simpson district in central Australia, with heavy rainfall expected to cause flash flooding. Victoria Ellis reports from Alice Springs.
I'm here on the banks of the Todd River in Alice Springs, and as you can see behind me, it is gushing. Now, this is usually an unusual sight for Alice Springs residents because the riverbed is normally completely dry and sandy, so much so that you can walk across it and have dry feet by the end. But we've had, over the past few weeks, significant rainfall, and residents have become somewhat used to seeing this wet stuff fall from the sky, and they've also become relatively used to seeing water flow in the Todd River. But despite that, it is still exciting for some people.
Well, it's a lifetime experience because, you know, normally it's dry. It's normally dry as dry can be, and you walk through the riverbed. You don't see this.
It's amazing, yeah. I haven't seen it flow. I just drove past Charles Creek, and the first time I ever, born here and from here, first time I seen that, up and running.
It's too scary for me because I might get flying away, like this man got flying away. He was in the river, and then he went flying.
So you've got to be safe, don't you? Stay on the banks.
Yes.
And what's caused this rain is that there was about 70 mils of rainfall that fell in the upper catchment of the river. And in the 2 hours leading up to 5 a.m, I think there was around 55 mils at Wiggly's Crossing, and I think 65 at Upper Bond Springs. So that's a lot of rain in a very short amount of time for Alice Springs. And that water is all making its way downstream. The water levels have come up a little bit this morning and they've gone down, but it is likely that they could go up and down for a few more hours before they recede completely. Now, outside of Alice Springs town, there is also a storm watch and act alert for parts of the Simpson district. So that's basically south and east of Alice Springs. So places like Altunga, Fink, Santa Teresa, those regions and those communities have been urged to be cautious and be prepared. The roads are often impassable or flooded, so if anybody is planning on heading out, they should check the Road Report NT website, and that includes in town. The low-lying roads crossing the Todd River have been closed. It's likely to cause some congestion over the Stott Terrace Bridge, and there is a back road open through the power station for residents in the golf course estate who may become temporarily isolated by floodwaters. Now, because of all this low-lying water, police have issued a warning to not drive, walk or swim in floodwaters. We know that the levels can go up and down very quickly. And there has been an incident this morning where police had to respond when a car was washed into floodwaters. So the message stays the same as it has throughout all these flooding events. If it is flooded, forget it.
The Weather Bureau says a cyclone watch could be issued for far north Queensland as early as tomorrow, with a tropical low developing in the eastern Coral Sea. With more, here's reporter Connor Byrne in Cairns.
All eyes in far north Queensland are on the Bureau of Meteorology today as it expects to announce a cyclone watch for parts of the Cape York Peninsula. This is because tropical low 34U is off the Solomon Islands, somewhere between the Solomons and Vanuatu at the moment, about 1,700 kilometres east of Cairns in the Coral Sea. And the Bureau has high confidence that this system has a high chance of becoming a tropical cyclone before it reaches the Australian mainland, possibly as soon as Thursday night. The Bureau has confidence that the cyclone will be called Narelle and it will be strong or severe, severe being a Category 3 system. Current bomb modelling shows that 34U, it's likely to be north of Cooktown, south of the tip, so the relevant communities include Cohen and Lockhart River. The Bureau says it won't stop there. It will maintain its structure and very quickly traverse the Cape towards Arcoon and Weipa and the Gulf of Carpentaria before reaching the Northern Territory border and possibly further on to the Kimberley in the West Australia region. The disaster plan for the Cook Shire Council warns residents to have their own plan to make necessary arrangements to shelter in place or to find a safer place of refuge. Cook Shire Council Mayor Robin Holmes says her council has a plan, that the Shire is prepared for any flooding, for any damage. However, she says that most of the Shire is on flood watch already. The place is saturated and it won't take much more rain to cause further flooding, so they're prepared. Strong wind warnings for Cooktown and Cairns Coast from tomorrow evening, the Bureau says, and the risk of gales increases after that. High chance of Cyclone Narelle forming before Thursday evening, but it could pack a punch. It could be a Category 2 or even a severe Category 3 system if the modelling is correct, and it has a high chance of reaching the Australian mainland before Thursday evening.
Conor Byrne there. The National Student Ombudsman says universities are routinely placing confidentiality restrictions on students who complain in ways that can sometimes put their well-being at risk. That's the finding from the Ombudsman's first report on the use of confidentiality clauses in the sector. Let's go to Hobart now, where reporter Scout Wallen has been following this story. Hi, Scout. So can you tell us about the investigation's findings?
Hi, Ros. Well, the Ombudsman found that 3 universities in Australia have improperly used confidentiality clauses on their students. Now, the National Student Ombudsman was set up last year to investigate claims from students about their universities. In its first report, as you said, it's looked into the use of confidentiality requirements. So that's when a student lodges a complaint or has a complaint lodged against them. Now, these requirements are automatically applied to students, and the Ombudsman said that these place students at risk who are recovering from trauma at risk, including in the context of gender-based violence complaints. Now, the Ombudsman identified that almost half of Australian universities use these confidentiality clauses or requirements, about 21 out of 44 unis, but they decided to investigate 3 universities and their use of them. That was the University of Technology, Sydney, the University of Newcastle and James Cook University. Now, it found that those 3 universities had improperly applied the use of these restrictions and requirements, which had impacted student wellbeing. Some of the other more specific findings included students were unfairly held to maintain the confidentiality after the investigation or the process was over, that there weren't adequate exceptions in these confidentiality clauses to allow students to seek internal or external support, and also that the official policies and misconduct procedures didn't explicitly provide details to students about the confidentiality requirements.
And what's the Ombudsman recommended, Scout?
Well, it's handed down 7 recommendations. These include things like making sure that there are clear ways that students can seek legal or other kinds of support while going through these processes. And it's also recommended at the end of a complaint process, making sure that students are able to speak about the investigation afterwards. So UTS, James Cook Uni and the Uni of Newcastle have all accepted these recommendations, and they've told the ABC they're really committed to improving the process for their students. But it's important to note that these recommendations were actually made to all universities. As I said, almost half of unis use these confidentiality requirements, and the Ombudsman is hoping that these recommendations will act as a lesson for all the universities in Australia as to how to make sure that these processes are trauma-informed.
Scout Wallen reporting there from Hobart. Thank you. The Danish Royals have started day 4 of their Australian tour in Melbourne. Here's reporter Costa Haratos to tell us more. Hi Costa, so what have they been up to today?
Good morning, Ros. Well, the Danish Royals have arrived here at Government House on a wet Melbourne morning today, where the King and the Queen have met with Governor Margaret Gardner and Premier Jacinta Ardern. They've signed the visitors' book inside Government House. The Danish flag is flying alongside the Victorian flag at that building. And soon the royal couple will meet with business leaders from both Australia and Denmark as well. So keeping those ties between Queen Mary's adopted country and, of course, where she was born here in Australia. Now, it's a full itinerary for the pair today. They're staying overnight and they'll be in Melbourne once again tomorrow before heading down to Hobart. This is day 4 of their 6-day Australian tour, Ros. Lots to do, and I'm sure the public will be hanging out to catch a glimpse of the two royals from Denmark.
Good stuff. Costa, thank you. This is ABC News. Our top stories. The Reserve Bank is tipped to deliver another increase to the cash rate today. The war in the Middle East is continuing to create market uncertainty as the RBA looks to respond to global oil disruption and rising inflation. The Big Four banks are forecasting a 0.25% rate rise. Afghan authorities say at least 400 people have been killed in a Pakistani airstrike on a hospital in Kabul. Around 3,000 people were being treated at the facility when the attack occurred. The two neighbouring countries have been exchanging fire for weeks. The US president has lashed out at European allies for failing to heed his calls to help secure the Strait of Hormuz as Iran maintains its blockade of the route. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says the war is, quote, not a matter for NATO. And a New South Wales woman is calling for reform of Australia's IVF sector after accidentally discovering she and her twin sister are not genetically related to their parents. The siblings' mother had an embryo transfer at Sydney's Royal North Shore Hospital in 1995, unaware the embryos were from another couple. Some news just in now. Iraqi security sources say 2 rockets have been fired at the US Embassy in Baghdad. They've described it as the most intense assault since the attacks began, with at least 5 drones used. There were earlier reports that a drone hit Al Rashid Hotel in the Green Zone, which houses governmental buildings and the US Embassy. US President Donald Trump has vented his frustrations today as European leaders resist his calls to help the US secure the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump has reiterated his request, calling on China, South Korea and Japan in particular, who he says get a large percentage of their oil through the strait. Melissa Conley-Tyler is with the University of Melbourne's Asia Institute and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Melissa.
Good afternoon, Roth.
So can we start by looking at the countries Donald Trump has highlighted? He wants Japan and South Korea to step up, and also China, which is a strange request, isn't it, given one of its major strategic partners is Iran?
I think what he's going for are who are the countries that have been most affected by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And, we can see that countries which are dependent for overseas oil are the ones who are going to be most hit. In the case of these 3, for South Korea, they've said they will consider. For Japan, they've ruled it out, and that has to be the case under Japan's current constitution, which is a post-World War II constitution that says that Japan can only have a self-defense force. It cannot have a military force that can go into other arenas. I find the China one very interesting, and I think what it shows to me is a lack of understanding of the way China has been seeing this. For decades, Chinese military thinkers have seen this as one of the 2 choke points that could prevent China's development, Strait of Hormuz and Strait of Malacca. If either of those are blocked off, that means that China as an oil-dependent country would be in terrible trouble. Now, they've been doing so much about this. They've been investing in renewables. We have whole Chinese cities which only have electric cars now. They've been investing in overland routes, and so that's where something like China's Belt and Road Initiative comes from, is to make sure that there are no going to be hit by this. So they are in no way as badly hit as the US or, say, India are by this situation.
And how much are we hit here in Australia by this?
A lot. Again, for Australia, you know, the sea lines of communication are absolutely vital for us. Australia said that we will not send a ship, so that's been made clear. I think we have a strong interest in a diplomatic solution to this, and I've got to say, if real people weren't actually involved in this, I'd almost be finding it funny to watch Donald Trump in real time realise that all this disdain he has for diplomacy and all this disdain for partners and allies, well, actually you need diplomacy because you need to talk to each other, and you need partners and allies if you can't do a thing yourself. So while he's working out in real time how diplomacy works, I think that the rest of us should be encouraging the US to have a very clear set of what its objectives are in this war, and then to be using diplomatic channels to try to open up a lifeline for the whole world in terms of oil.
Just to return to supply for the moment, Melissa, Singapore's always mentioned in connection with Australia's fuel supply. How much of our fuel comes from there?
Yeah, so we're lucky in a way in that our refined fuel comes from much closer to home, from Singapore, Malaysia, etc. We do get, however, they get some of that oil, obviously, through the Straits of Hormuz. I think, for me, one of the most interesting things about this is thinking about the way that NATO is responding and the Europeans are responding. So they have the same sort of dependency that, you know, Australia does. They have a lot of oil that's coming to them, but they're looking at this and saying, well, no, this was actually an illegal war to start with. Spain has been very clear on that, or even if they're not willing to go that far, they say, look, you've got to use diplomacy. We were not consulted about you going into this war. Coming now and demanding that we get involved is a bit rich. And NATO is a mutual defence pact, not a mutual attack pact. If any one of the countries of NATO is invaded, such as Greenland were to be invaded, then we will defend each other. But that does not mean we are going to support you in a more expeditionary war like this.
Is there any precedents, Melissa, for this proposal from Donald Trump? Have we seen this sort of cooperation before at any time?
Look, it is possible. And for example, in that area, there has been long-term European cooperation, which Australia has been involved in things like anti-piracy operations. So if countries choose and agree to work together on a common problem, they absolutely can do so. But in this case, you know, with the war raging, everyone would be concerned that they're being dragged into it. For me, one of the most interesting players in this is thinking about India. So India is very, very dependent on oil coming from the Straits of Hormuz. They're also a real friend of Iran. So when I was in India recently, you know, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran was there. They, at the moment, are negotiating access for their own Indian ships, but they could actually play a useful role in brokering an agreement. And if I think of another example, like you asked, I would look at things like with the Ukraine war and making sure that shipments of wheat could still get out. There was a role in coming up with a limited ceasefire to enable that to happen, because the impact of things like wheat or things like oil, not just on Australia, but on the world's very poorest, is huge. And so anything that can be done to try to limit the scope of the war and keep those supplies happening would be a good service.
Melissa Connolly-Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
New Zealand's Defence Minister says her country wants to see a resolution to the war in the Middle East. Judith Collins is in Canberra for an annual meeting between Australian and New Zealand foreign and defence ministers, and it comes as both countries grapple with the economic and strategic implications from the Middle East war. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts is with us. Hi, Stephen. So what are the big fears for Australia and New Zealand about the war in Iran?
Look, obviously there are fears around further escalation, but the big concern for Australia and New Zealand is primarily economic. Both Australia and New Zealand, as we've been reporting all morning, are very dependent on the import of oil. So with the Strait of Hormuz now largely blockaded, those economic consequences for Australia and New Zealand are very real, even if at the moment we're only feeling the very first ripple impacts of that war. Now, Judith Collins, who's in Canberra, as you mentioned, for a meeting with Penny Wong, Richard Marles and, of course, Winston Peters, her counterpart in New Zealand. She dropped in on the ABC earlier today for a brief chat. She said that New Zealand, like Australia, had not yet fielded any sort of request from the United States to join a naval convoy to protect oil through the Strait of Hormuz. But she did say that New Zealand was keeping a very close eye on the conflict and was pretty candid that, yes, the economic impacts, although not yet substantial, could be very serious down the track if the war is protracted and if there isn't a peaceful resolution anytime soon. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
What I do want to see is an end to a conflict which is actually going to put a lot of stress on the rest of the world where it comes around those oil supplies. I see stresses in possibly countries like China, for instance, because they've been getting, 13 to 14% of their oil out of Iran. Also a significant chunk out of Bahrain. So there's a Saudi.
We're going to jump in there and take you live to Canberra, where the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, is speaking.
Refineries and importers, that they would work with the government to prioritise supplies to those regions which are undergoing such shortages. I'm very pleased with the progress. The companies have been presenting their plans to my department over the course of the last 24 hours, and they're being ticked off. And I'm hopeful that we will see fuel flow from that in the immediate future. As I said on Friday, it will take some time, as I think people understand. We have a complicated supply chain. The refineries don't have trucks idling in their car parks just waiting for more fuel supply to be released, but the minimum stock obligation companies have been working very, very well with the government over the last 48 hours, and certainly since the announcement was made, to ensure that it has as much impact as quickly as possible. The change I announced on Thursday for the sulphur requirements has been enacted, and again, as I said, that is really designed to help Ampol put 100 million litres of fuel a month into the energy supply chain, and that is already underway and working. I've just come from the today's roundtable meeting, the second roundtable with the National Farmers Federation, the Australian Institute of Petroleum, Australian Trucking Association, Fertiliser Australia and others, and a really good spirit of cooperation around the room, information sharing, and not just with and from the government, but with each other about areas of shortage. I want to thank particularly the National Farmers Federation and the Australian Institute of Petroleum, which represents the refiners, or everyone involved, but those two groups in particular representing the two different ends of the supply chain on how closely they're working together with the government, with myself, with Minister Catherine King, with Minister Julie Collins and Minister Tim Ayres. That process is working very well. So that's just an update on everything that we've put in place. Of course, the international environment remains uncertain, but as I've said many times since the beginning of the bombing of Iran and the subsequent events, that we can't guarantee that international times won't be uncertain. We can guarantee that the government will be working non-stop to ensure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be, and that the impact on Australians and Australia is as little as it can be. Happy to take some questions. I'll go to Sarah first.
Last week we did hear from China about ceasing jet fuel. Have you spoken to your counterparts, when that would flow again separately? You and the government said no contracts have been cancelled thus far. Oil is fuel flowing in. But do you have a sense of contracts for April, maybe?
Well, there's a few questions there, so let me just step it out with due respect to everyone. First, in relation to China, between myself, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, there is contact with all our important Asian counterparts. I'm not going to go into the details about who's speaking to who, but the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and I are speaking every morning, and we are engaging with all our colleagues. Every ship that we have expected to arrive has arrived, whether it's diesel, petrol or jet fuel. You're right. All the companies say to me that they fully expect all deliveries all through March and well into April, but we are in an internationally uncertain time. and that's why we're doing such planning at the moment. Matthew.
Minister, is there price gouging happening for Gaza? And if there is, why isn't the ACCC throwing the book at these things?
Well, I would encourage you to await the ACCC's update for later in today. They are currently meeting with the industry. I wasn't in that meeting, but as you know, we have lifted the ACCC's powers and the penalties, and the ACCC will give you an update on that in due course.
How long, Minister, before the government has to consider fuel rationing?
Well, as I've said, what we want is Australians to buy as much fuel as they need, not more, not less. That is the best answer for everyone. Now, we're in discussions with the states, of course, about forward planning, etc. But what I believe is that because the fuel continues to arrive in Australia, as expected, because the refineries are working very well and producing the diesel and the petrol, and supplying the regions as quickly as they can to make up for the shortfall that arose with the 100% spike in demand. And as I've been very clear with people, you get a 100% increase in demand for any commodity, you're going to find shortages in the short term when demand doubles in a few days. Right? And it will take some time for the system to respond to that. But if we keep going with these supply measures, and if Australians respond in the spirit of all coming together and not panic buying, then that maximises our chances of getting through this situation, and that it's best that the market be allowed to operate. Claire.
There obviously is panic buying going on. People are looking for clarity where there obviously is not necessarily the ability for the government to offer certainty. Given you've just said you expect those oil deliveries to continue well into April, could you at least give some clarity and not anticipating having to look at rationing?
I'm not I've been very clear. We are not anticipating that. Yes.
Minister, just on Claire's point, the pandemic-era research on panic buying shows people make these decisions based on a risk calculation. Is it worth stepping out some of these risk scenarios where some of these trigger points are, so people have that information and maybe less induced to panic?
Well, again, people can be confident that the Australian government, state governments, there's been many state roundtables. I participated in the South Australian one yesterday, New South Wales had one yesterday, Victoria's had one, Western Australia's taken strong action, are obviously undertaking the preparations which best see us through the coming period. Panic buying does not help the situation. Panic buying very much is the cause of the situation. Every ship has arrived. The refiners are working well. Now, as I said, I think it was on Friday, can't lump everyone in together. I completely understand the concerns of Australians who might be thinking we'll buy a bit of extra fuel. There's been also separately, people going to Bunnings and buying out all the Bunnings jerry cans. That is unhelpful. That is un-Australian. If they're trying to maximise profits on Facebook Marketplace. But there are other people who are concerned who are taking what they regard to be the right action. I just say to everyone, it is in everyone's best interest. We are increasing fuel supply. Making that work is harder if it all gets consumed straight away in that panic buying. Just here.
You've been telling people for over a week now to stop panic buying. They're still panic buying. Clearly that's not working. Why not come to a point where you're going to have to intervene further?
Well, you might advocate for rationing now. We're not. Well, you're asking why we're not, and we're not doing that because we don't believe at this point that's what is the best solution. We believe the best solution is providing maximum information to the Australian people, factual information that the ships are arriving, refining's working, and reminding people that we are all in this together and we're better off if we don't engage in that sort of panic buying. Katina.
Energy Minister Chris Bowen there speaking about efforts to ensure that fuel keeps flowing. There's a reduction in fuel quality that's been enacted, the Minister said, and today there's been a roundtable meeting with Farmers Federation and the organisation which represents refiners, among others. The Minister said there was a good deal of cooperation in the room. Every ship we had expected to arrive has arrived, he said, but we are in an internationally uncertain time. Chris Bowen going on to say that we can guarantee that the government will work to be as prepared as we can be. The Energy Minister there appealing to motorists to buy only the fuel that's needed. So that's the Energy Minister in Canberra with the latest on the fuel situation in Australia. An independent panel of experts has concluded that the country's R&D sector is in desperate need of bold reform. The ambitious Australia report, which was commissioned by the government, is warning that Australia's future living standards are at risk unless changes are made. Right now, research and development investment has fallen to just 1.69% of GDP. That's almost half the OECD average of 3%. Anna Maria Arabia is Chief Executive at the Australian Academy of Science and joins us now in the studio. Pleased to say, Anna Maria, thanks for coming in. So why is our R&D spend so low?
It's been declining for some years, more than a decade actually, and what we've seen is fragmentation across our sector, incrementalism when it comes to policy changes by government, and this has led to declining investment. We're now at a point, you know, Australians quite like a league table, we are falling fast to the wooden spoon. We're towards the bottom of the OECD countries with the sort of investment that you've just described, and it's time to turn it around and rather quickly.
So where does R&D spending go? Who gets it and what's it for?
Everyone gets it. So at the moment, R&D investment is made by various actors. That includes government, the business sector and the higher education sector. And they produce knowledge which is then used to create new industries, to innovate, to create new jobs. And everybody benefits from that, Ros. Everybody benefits through the solar panels they have on their rooftops. Everybody benefits in their iPhones, the medicines they take. We see our R&D in all of these places. The food on our table is a result of investment in agricultural technology, for example. Australia's really strong in many of these areas. It's often said that we punch well above our weight when it comes to research. We now need to commercialise that research and ensure that the dividends of that investment go back into investing in knowledge generation so that we can keep that innovation cycle going. This is really nicely described in the Ambitious Australia report, which was released today.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about the connection between R&D then and actual living standards?
Absolutely. So we know that when we invest in R&D, we improve productivity, we create jobs and we create new industries. All of these things lead to better living standards for Australians. What's really interesting is that the Treasurer and others have identified this in years gone by, and as recently as last year, where Treasurer Chalmers has said what we decide today in this decade will be important for the living standards of the next generation. Intergenerational justice is really important. The sort of living standards we can pass on need to improve. If we don't lift our game in terms of R&D investment, we can't produce those productivity dividends. We can't produce the industries that are going to employ the graduates of today and tomorrow. It is really, really important that we make these decisions today. They probably should have been made a decade ago. You know, it's often said that the best time for reform was 30 years ago. The next best time is now. But we do need to make these decisions now to ensure intergenerational equity going forward.
By its very nature, though, research and experimentation, there must be some R&D spends which don't end up with concrete results. Is it a bit of a hit and miss system?
Well, that's a really positive aspect of the system. So you only need to think about Wi-Fi. No one decided to invest in Wi-Fi development. They invested in radio astronomy, which led to the discovery of Wi-Fi, which is now a worldwide technology that's used. Photovoltaic cell technology was born out of UNSW, actually, and now we have solar panels on roofs across the world and across the country that everybody benefits from. Some of what we often call curiosity-driven research is really important. It leads to those serendipitous findings. I do want to also reflect on the sort of investment the business make in R&D, which is more directed to outcomes. That also needs to be sharpened up and focused so that taxpayer investments to provide incentives for business to innovate is money well spent. And the report outlines some recommendations to enable that.
Anna Maria Arabia, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Lovely to be with you.
Twin sisters in New South Wales have discovered that they were born to a mother that they're not genetically related to after an IVF mix-up. One of the sisters accidentally uncovered the mistake last year after sending a DNA sample to a genealogy website. It's the second known case of an embryo mix-up of this kind in Australia. For more, ABC journalist Elise Kinsella joins us from Melbourne. Elise, how did the sisters learn about this mix-up?
Ros, one of the twin sisters, Sasha Safransky, she joined a genealogy tracing website last year, and it was a reason that had nothing to do with IVF. She was just curious about her dad's Polish heritage and wanting to learn more. So she sent away her DNA, and when the results came back, they were quite quickly confusing. So they said that she had no Polish heritage, and then they matched her with a complete stranger who also lived in the same coastal community, and the website said that this woman was her maternal aunt. So the pair started chatting, and they quickly discovered this IVF crossover. So this woman's sister and her husband in the 90s had undergone IVF just at the same time as Sasha's parents had, and they discovered that they both used the same clinic. Both families at this point went and had further DNA tests at accredited labs, and those results came back showing a 99.9% chance that Sasha and her twin sister are the biological children of this other couple they'd never met.
Do we know how this mix-up happened, Elise?
Both of the families have hired lawyers to investigate, so they know that both couples were undergoing IVF treatment at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney at the same time. But what they don't know is actually how the mistake happened. So the hospital has said at the time of the embryo transfer that it had privatised the clinic already. Now that company no longer exists. It was taken over years later by another company, which was later acquired by Virtus Health, which also denies responsibility. And so for Penny Safransky, who is Sasha's mum, there's a sense of not having any answers about a problem that she never had any inkling about.
It never even entered my head that you wouldn't be, getting the embryos that were mine.
So, Elise, why have Sasha and her mum Penny decided to speak out?
For Sasha, it's really important that this very, very large IVF mistake was put on the public record, that it's not swept under the carpet, and the public does know that this happened in Australia in our IVF sector. She said to me it's really important that she gets answers for her mum and her biological parents, and she wants our politicians and regulators who oversee the industry to hear her family's story and see the consequences of a mistake that is this large. But interestingly, she really does still support IVF.
I think IVF is just incredible. I wouldn't be here without it. People wouldn't have their families without it, but it's just, you just have to get it right.
So that's Sasha Safransky, who was talking about the IVF sector in Australia after last year learning that she and her twin sister were born to parents they are not biologically related to.
Elise, thank you. And you can see more of the ABC's exclusive story with Sasha and Penny on tonight's 7:30 on ABC TV and iView. Quick look at the national weather now. Cloudy in Brisbane and in Sydney. Canberra, a possible shower. Rainy also in Melbourne with a top there just 21. Hobart and Adelaide, partly cloudy. Sunny in Perth and showers with a possible storm in Darwin and a top there of 31 degrees. There's more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Ros Childs. Coming up on the ABC News channel, I'll have more on today's top stories, including continuing coverage of the Reserve Bank's interest rate decision. Bye for now.